Hello everyone, this is Team Restart, and today we're going to be getting into the truth about Nintendo Switch 2 sales this holiday. And I'm going to extend this conversation to Nintendo Switch 1 as well, just Nintendo overall, and this will also include what's going on with Metroid Prime 4. There's a lot of questions about this game, and there's certainly a lot of debate online right now. So we're going to be getting to all of that today. Now, I'm going to be handling this video with a bit more simplicity. I'm on a bit of a time crunch today, so it's going to be a very quick, simple edit, so please bear with me. But hopefully you still find yourself enjoying the video, or perhaps some of my other videos, and so if you do, I would very much appreciate your subscription if you haven't subscribed already. But on to what's been going on. The Nintendo Switch 2 is actually doing extremely well. All those people over these last few months that have been telling you the Switch 2 is a flop, that it's not doing well, that things are looking disastrous, well, that was either a lie or based off stupidity. Because the Switch 2 is actually doing extremely well. It is still pacing to continue to be the best-selling console in video game history, currently sitting at, as of December 31st, 2025, 17.37 million units worldwide. And what's awesome about this is that Nintendo still has 3 months to spare to hit their target of 19 million. Reminder that a few months back, Nintendo actually updated their forecast, where they're initially anticipating just selling 15 million units in its first fiscal year, so a 9-month span basically, because it came out June 5th until its fiscal years end on March 31st. So within this window, they were expecting to sell 15 million, but they updated that forecast to 19 million. And now, after the holidays, we're getting this reported data, and there are many outlets and many creators trying to spin data and information to tell you things are going poorly, but right now, Nintendo is still pacing with the Switch 2 as the fastest selling console in video game history, and they only need to hit a little bit under 2 million in 3 months, and they've been averaging over 1 million per month, so they likely are going to be hitting their 19 million forecast, which is an expanded forecast, and even at 15 million, if they were to hit that target, it still would have been really strong, very fast selling. So yes, Switch 2 is doing really well. It did not have a bad holiday, as some people would have you believe. It's doing really, really good. In fact, when we go to Switch 1 sales, notice here, for its first calendar year, it sold 15 million. It actually came out March 3rd, so for just a few weeks, for the end of Nintendo's fiscal year, they had sold 2.74, and then for the next fiscal year, they sold 15.05, totaling out to 17.79. So with over a year of sales, the Switch 1 had hit 17.79, and with the Switch 2, not even having 9 months of sales, they're at 17.37 million. So even though we're in a very challenging economic climate where people aren't buying things as much and things are more expensive, the Switch 2 is doing really good, outpacing the Switch 1 by a lot. And that's really interesting because the Switch 1 has just hit 155.37 million units worldwide, officially becoming the best-selling Nintendo console in its history. Nintendo, their best-selling console beforehand was the DS at 154.02. The Switch has now exceeded that with 155. Now, will Switch ever catch the PS2? The PS2 for years, as reported by Sony, was at 155 plus, but recently they changed it to 160 million. A lot of people are very skeptical on Sony's reportings, but can the Switch 1 hit that target? Possibly. When we take a look at how Switch 1 has been selling recently, for this fiscal year so far, so for the first 3 quarters, they sold 3.25 million. But notice they had a significant drop-off over the prior year, so they're certainly losing momentum, and we're not sure how much momentum will maintain, but Nintendo is still anticipating on selling an additional 0.75 million by the end of the fiscal year. So we take a look over here, it shows that data. Right here, they're anticipating on selling 4 million. So it's going to be very interesting to see how things continue. Another 750,000 does get you very close. They would then basically be at 156 million, with just needing to sell another 4 million. If Switch 1 can maintain selling 4 million per year, then they'll pass it in a year, but if you look at the significant drop off here from the prior fiscal year, you gotta think that it's probably going to continue to drop off. Maybe by not as much, because the Switch 2 did just come out, and maybe Nintendo's going to start to position the Switch 1 as more of a console you play as an economic option. Perhaps eventually they will offer a price drop. Reminder, Switch 1 still has not seen a wide-scale official price drop yet, so Nintendo still has that option in their back pocket to push Switch 1 sales, which I imagine at some point they will do. Switch 1 is still relevant, not as relevant as Switch 2, but it is still relevant, so I actually feel very strongly that the Switch 1 can become the best-selling console of all time, especially because Nintendo has yet to do a price drop at some point or another. Before Switch 1 is phased out entirely, this will happen. So we'll see, but yeah, I feel very confident about this one. But what's also really interesting is that the Switch 2, in terms of software, has sold nearly double the amount of units that are out there, nearly 38 million. So that's pretty good. That means everyone so far, on average, has bought 2 games per console. That's a great start software-wise as well. But on the note of software, let's take a look at some games here that have been selling really well from Nintendo. So Mario Kart World has already sold 14.03 million copies. That's incredible, but let's remind ourselves that this is bundled with most Switch 2s. This is the most popular bundle. It's a very economic bundle in comparison to the base model, because you're saving $30 on Mario Kart World. But of course, Mario Kart, a series that is always selling really well with Nintendo, is, yes, selling well. What I find more interesting are these other games here. So Donkey Kong Bonanza is showing some evergreen sales here, continuing to sell well months after its release. It's now at 4.25 million, and I wonder if Donkey Kong can hit that 10 million target. That may seem lofty now, but if it continues to sell perhaps a million or two per year, then yeah, late into the Switch 2's era, Donkey Kong might hit that target. We'll see, but this is pretty good. Donkey Kong Bonanza is an amazing game. It's either my second or third favorite game from last year, so I'm definitely happy to see this game do so well. Now, Legend ZA, you might be confused by this, because here it says the game has sold 3.89 million copies, which would suggest it has sold worse than Bonanza, now obviously in less time, but this is actually just the physical Switch 2 edition, because apparently this data does not include any of the Switch 1 versions. So the digital version of Switch 1 or the physical version of Switch 1, those don't count towards this. Neither does the digital version of the Switch 2 edition. Apparently that counts towards Switch 1 sales, which may be very confusing, but basically we understand that this is what Legend ZA has sold, the 3.89 plus 8.41, which is 12.3 million. Which is interesting because it seems to be selling a lot faster than Legends Arceus. As you see here from this chart, it looks like Legends Arceus had come out January of 2022, and in its first couple quarters, they got the 12.64, yet Legend ZA got to that in just a couple months. So that, I would say, is pretty impressive, and it shows that, yeah, having a Switch 2 edition of Pokemon definitely probably helps sales a fair bit. Now, Kirby Air Riders has already surpassed its predecessor at 1.76 million as well, so that's pretty good too. But something you may notice here is that there is no Metroid Prime 4. There is no other title here that has shown to exceed 1 million copies sold. And so this actually has some people wondering about what's going on with Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment as well. Well, with Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, we actually know that it's exceeded 1 million, but the reason why I wouldn't be reporting on Nintendo is because it's made by Koei Tecmo, so that's why it's not showing up over here. Now, Metroid Prime 4, that's a different one. Some people are thinking this means that Metroid Prime 4 is a massive commercial flop because it has not even hit 1 million copies sold. And, well, that might not actually be the case. So, keep in mind a couple things here. One, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond came out with 2 versions, the Switch 2 edition and the Switch 1 version, and this game came out way after all these other games on December 4th, so the amount of reporting days of data for Metroid Prime 4 is far lesser than any of these other games. Just 27 days. Also, and this is the big one, Metroid Prime 4 not being here does not mean it's not sold over 1 million. What it means is that neither of its separate versions have sold over 1 million. So it's possible that Metroid Prime 4 overall has sold 1.99 million copies, but because both versions would be just under 1 million, they would not show up here. Now, most likely, it's not at 1.99 million copies. But I am willing to wager that it's still over 1 million copies, and being over 1 million copies with just 27 days of sales is actually not that bad, and if Metroid Prime 4 goes on to sell somewhere between 2 as more of the low ball, but per maybe a little more realistic target, versus 4 wouldn't be the end of the world. Now, this does suggest that Metroid Prime 4 is not becoming a viral success, but also its limited data doesn't tell if it's a flop either. It's probably somewhere in the middle, and I just think if Metroid Prime 4 sells 2 to 4 million, that'll be fine enough, and Nintendo will be like, okay, we established something here, we'll take some feedback and improve on it with the next game. We do have a little bit of information from a friend of the channel, Paul Gale, though. So Paul Gale is known to receive financial data before others, and you talked about this back on December 22nd. This is yet to be confirmed, but one source has stated that Metroid Prime 4 Beyond's Japanese sales represent less than 5% of the game's global total. If what I received is correct information, then the game, worldwide, is already sitting above 940,000 to 1.22 million, because of the 20-to-1 ratio represents a date that's older than 7 days ago. What percent less than 5 is not known. Some approximating was needed to come up with my range. The game is selling great in the West. And that is something we do know. We've seen Metroid Prime 4 at the top of the Switch 2 eShop sales charts. We've seen it high up in the Switch 1 eShop sales charts. We've seen it at the top of Amazon bestsellers. Like, we have seen ambiguous information suggesting that Metroid Prime 4 is doing well. So, to jump to the conclusion that Metroid Prime 4 is now a flop because not one individual version of the two exceeded 1 million in just 27 days, which is way less days than all the other Nintendo games, I think that's jumping to a conclusion here. A bad one. Paul Gale recently also said this: Metroid Dread sold an average of 32,235 per day from launch through December 31st. That totaled out to being 2.74 million in 85 days. Nintendo has not yet revealed how many total copies of Metroid Prime 4 Beyond were sold between both SKUs. I'm only going off of a mention that on Daily Breakdown it sold more, comparatively, than Metroid did, therefore being more impressive. To me, this means north of 870,000 is all but a guarantee. Now, I think this is an interesting perspective, but let's also remind ourselves that, yeah, initial sales usually, like the first few days, that first week or so, sales are going to be at its strongest, and things will kind of tail off afterwards. So it's possible that Metroid Prime 4 is actually having comparative sales to Metroid Dread between both versions, but we just don't know right now. And what we also don't know is how Metroid Prime 4 is going to age. Will it have any level of evergreen sales? Is it going to be the kind of game that people are going to pick up when they buy a Switch 2? Now, the thing about Metroid Prime 4 is that it is already available on Switch 1, but it might be the kind of game that people are holding off on playing on Switch 1 to play on Switch 2. As we have talked about before, Prime 4 was at the top of the Switch 2 eShop charts. It was not on Switch 1. Like, it was high up, but it wasn't number 1 or number 2 for several weeks. So that does suggest that there was a stronger relative interest for playing Metroid Prime 4 on Switch 2 versus Switch 1. So maybe Metroid Prime 4 will have some evergreen sales. That we do not know. So main point is, stop jumping to conclusions, be patient. We do not know how Metroid Prime 4 has sold yet. It may actually be solid. Now, something that I do find kind of curious here, and this is where there might be some room for negativity. You see here Nintendo's reporting on their annual playing users, and what's interesting is that year by year throughout the Switch 1 era, we saw that the playing users went up a little bit year by year, even towards the end. But as you see here, Nintendo's now reporting the first dip, it seems like. That's interesting, that the playing users has gone down. Now, what I think this partially has to do with is the fact that, well, a lot of people are done with their Switch 1, so they're not really playing it that much, but they haven't picked up a Switch 2 yet, so that's why we're kind of seeing this here. It's going to be interesting to see, as the Switch 2 builds up its library and continues to appeal to more people, if this annual playing user count will go up or down. And I think if it continues to go down, that could be a bad sign, but this also could just be a marker of a big transition, because this is the launch year of the Switch 2, where people are moving on from Switch 1 to Switch 2. So we'll see. We'll have to wait till next year to see if this is improving. I think Nintendo might give us some indication in their next quarterly results and such, but yeah, this is a potential warning sign, but also maybe not that big a deal. Again, we're gonna have to wait to see more data to have a better understanding. But that is the truth for Nintendo overall sales this holiday. What do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is Andres Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.